So wetland is defined by three characteristics. There has to be water present at least sometime during the year. So the plants adapted to growing in water have to be present. And then the third factor is soil. So the soils take on certain characteristics when they're in a wetland that are different from a non-wetland soil. A playa is a type of wetland that is characterized by a couple of factors. Playas receive their water from overland flow, from rain and snow events. They're perched above that surface of the groundwater due to a heavy clay layer in the soil. And that clay, when it gets wet, it ponds and holds that water above the surface. They also are not connected to the streams and rivers, and so they tend to be isolated wetlands. Playas are highly modified because they sit on productive soils, fairly flat lands, and areas that are very important to irrigated agriculture. So we're in Saunders County in Nebraska at a Todd Valley playa wetland, and that's one of 4 playa complexes that we've identified in Nebraska. So it's the Todd Valley, the Rainwater Basin, the Central Table Playas, and then we have an area we call the Southwest Playas. Playas are important for a couple of factors. One is soils are highly productive for plant and animal life. They're extremely important for migrating waterfowl and shorebirds that use these areas as rest stops on their migratory journey. When these wetlands dry out, that clay soil gets really large, deep cracks. And so when you get a rain event, that rainwater moves directly into the groundwater. And so they're very important points of groundwater recharge for our aquifers, including the Ogallala Aquifer. One of the things I think is really unique about playas is they're out here in this highly agriculturally dominated landscape. And you come upon one and it's like this little hotspot of biological activity. It's just amazing when you're driving around, come upon a playa, and it's just full of life.
Yeah, come on. I'm like trying to herd cats. I'm going for a boat ride.
Last month we were up in South Dakota visiting a project where they're capturing blue-winged teal. Blue-winged teal is a type of duck. It nests in Nebraska some, but also especially up in the prairie potholes of the Dakotas and up into Canada. So they were putting a satellite transmitter on the females, and then they use those satellite transmitters and will follow them on their migratory journey, seeing where the birds go, what habitats they use, what they do in those habitats.
The prairie pothole region, it covers a really vast area across North and South Dakota, a little bit into Minnesota and Iowa, and then going up into Canada as well. This area just holds a bunch of seasonal wetlands. I've had quite a few of my transmitter birds travel through Nebraska. Like all the birds that we're marking up here, a lot of them are passing back down into Louisiana and even further south depending on the species.
Louisiana has more coastal wetlands than any other state in the country except Alaska, and the types of wetlands that we have here with salt marsh, intermediate marsh, brackish marsh, fresh marsh, all the river deltas. You get up in a plane and you look down at this place and we're surrounded, the marsh goes literally 100 miles off to the east. sea level rise predictions hold true, I mean, we're going to be standing underwater in 50 years. This place won't be here anymore. That's very concerning. There's millions of ducks and geese that winter in this area, and there's no place else like it. We had everything baited. We had the net set and everything last night. We met here at 5:15, drove out within 2/3 of a mile of the site, parked the truck, walked in the dark, got in the blind. Obviously the ducks were there, and then it was just a waiting game. Fired the net when all their heads were down and we didn't have any issues with that, and then it's just a mad rush to get them all out of the water and crate it up and up into the trucks as quick as we can. So we brought them back here in about a half a mile back to the lab. So we banded everything. We picked a few pintail hens to put transmitters on, fitted them with their transmitters, held them for a few minutes, and then we released them right back here on site. Keep tabs on their journeys forward. Birds depend on us. We've manipulated this landscape so much. We owe it to both the wildlife and the next generation to do the best we can to preserve what's left. When they pick up and leave the Gulf Coast, full tank of gas will get them up 3 or 4 states away. So those places to stop and refuel are critical for them. So that's their gas station, that's their grocery store on the way, and they need dependable wetlands along their stop. It's as simple as that. Basically, the whole region of eastern Nebraska is pretty important continentally for literally everything I've put transmitters on down here, from pintails to white fronts, mallards, blue wings. Eastern Nebraska is a big stopover area for a lot of our birds.
The Rainwater Basin is just such an interesting landscape with such a high density of wetlands. There's so many opportunities for conservation. It's right in the middle of the flyway. And the flyway includes the areas in the south where they winter, such as the Gulf Coast, and also their breeding grounds in the north, like the prairie potholes. A large proportion of snow geese stop over in the Rainwater Basin during spring migration. I'm sure most people have seen the giant flocks in the sky, and that is a huge proportion of the continental population of snow geese that stops over. We also get a lot of mallards and northern pintail that stop over. It's been estimated that 50% or more of the northern pintail population may stop over in the Rainwater Basin during spring. We get a lot of blue-winged teal and green-winged teal, and several species of diving ducks as well. There's not too many other areas in this country that you can see something like spring migration in the Rainwater Basin.
Franklin's gulls. So there's also some Hudsonian godwits in the mix, and one marbled godwit. I'm Joel Jorgensen. I'm the non-game bird program manager with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. So I cover in my program all the birds that are not hunted in the state. The fact that these are dynamic wetlands is important to shorebirds. Just the fact that you have water levels that are up and down all the time. So that dynamic ends up creating the shoreline habitat and the mudflat habitat that shorebirds need. There's a few different species that are probably the extreme migrants: white rump sandpiper, Baird sandpiper, buff-breasted sandpiper, and Hudsonian godwit are species that come to mind that spend their winter in extreme southern portions of South America, Argentina or Chile, and then also breed in northern Canada, Alaska, and in some cases, like with the buff-breasted sandpiper, even in Siberia. Essentially, the entire world population of buff-breasted sandpipers are stopping over in the eastern part of the Rainwater Basin from between Hastings and Lincoln. The fact that this landscape in some regards is so unremarkable when you first look at it, it's not like a mountain range or some other exceptional landscape, but in my view it is still exceptional just from its role for so many different migratory bird populations, and just that you have such huge congregation of birds. That doesn't occur everywhere. That's kind of a unique thing that we have here in Nebraska and in the Great Plains.
Go take a peek? Yeah. You guys ready? Alright. What do you want to look at first?
Oh, there's three.
Here they come. Here they come back. Get ready. Coming back. Ready, Logan, from the right. Several of us hunting a lot of different things. Teal season is kind of a nice way to kick it all off and get out while it's still kind of warm outside. Conservation isn't cheap. Our system's set up so that the user pays and everybody benefits. So areas like this here are provided by those hunter dollars and those recreational shooter dollars. They're easy to access and open to everybody, which really adds to it. As the name implies, Rainwater Basin, what rain you have or don't have kind of shapes that landscape.
One of Aaron's favorite spots to go this year was Bone Dry. And there had been years where we were there, you could actually float a canoe. There were people there with small motorboats even. I mean, you were, waist deep in the water. And this year it's completely dry. So it's always very interesting to see how different it is from year to year.
I would say the main recreational opportunities Playas provide are through wildlife observation and hunting. We pump areas as we can to meet the needs of both wildlife and our waterfowl hunters. Early on in the season, we do a little bit of pumping for like the teal hunting season and early duck season. Just if the wetlands already got a little bit of water in it, it can fill up fairly quickly with our pumping. If it's totally dry, has those big cracks in it, we can pump all day in August or even September, and that water just soaks right back down into the ground. If we were to constantly pump water into this wetland, eventually all the plants would die out or change over to a different type of plant. When that water does disappear, they dry up. That allows many of the plants that are important to germinate, and many of those species won't germinate underwater. Even though people don't necessarily always like to see it when these dry up, that's part of a natural process, and it's an important process to kind of reset the cycle of these wetlands and allow them to sustain their productivity.
This whole area was nothing but open prairie. very, very few trees on the landscape. It was all native grasses and wildflowers. And then you had these pockets of wetlands out here in the Rainwater Basin. We have really good technology today to inventory wetlands. We have the use of satellite data, aerial photography from airplanes and such. And what we have discovered is that only about 10 to 11% of the rainwater basins that were historically on this landscape are remaining today.
In this cropland setting, the playas have been modified over time to try to, in some places, drain or remove water so they can increase their amount of crop production. They would dig pits, so they would dig these areas out that are not huge necessarily, but they're fairly deep. And so that concentrates the waters. You still have as much water out there as far as like amount of water, but it's all concentrated in a really deep pit. And that's much less productive for wildlife. And if you get too much water too fast over bare cropland, you can actually get sediment moving through erosion. So that material ends up washing with each rain event into the playa. And so once it gets into the wetland, it's kind of stuck there. It's kind of a death by 1,000 cuts. It's not necessarily one thing that's caused that playa to be altered. All those things cumulatively can really have a negative impact and have really altered most of our playas in Nebraska.
We want to restore the wetland back to its natural condition to where it held water and produced the native plants that grew here before it was converted. Wetland ecologists, such as myself, we will come out and we'll look at a wetland and we'll see if it's functioning the way that particular type of wetland should function. If we come to a rainwater basin wetland that has a big pit in it, has a drainage ditch coming out of it, these are all hydrologic modifications that need to be fixed.
You have to understand what the alterations were and then how to fix them. So it requires input from a soil scientist. Sometimes you'll need help from a botanist or a hydrologist.
And then the engineers will come in and survey the area and draw up engineering plans to accomplish the restoration that we want on the area. And whoever we end up hiring then will come in and will accomplish that restoration as it was designed on the plans. Once you get the hydrology of that wetland restored, get the water cycle back to what it was historically, the rest kind of takes care of itself. We've brought a lot of wetlands back to life, and that's going to continue on for the future. For the rainwater basins, I think there is a lot of hope.
Most of the wetlands in Nebraska, including our playas, are in private ownership. They're owned by farmers, ranchers, acreage owners. When we do conservation work on playas, we have to work collaboratively with those landowners in order to get that conservation accomplished.
So I'm Andy Bishop. I'm the Rainwater Basin Joint Venture Coordinator. The Rainwater Basin Joint Venture is a public-private partnership. So a lot of what I get to do is work with the different conservation organizations, probably most importantly landowners, to try to develop projects that fit into this working landscape that we call the Rainwater Basin.
My name's Gail Marsh. We're standing in the middle of Hamilton County, and I'm a corn, bean, wheat cover crop farmer. This is a wetland area that was farmed quite a few years. It was pretty prone to flooding out.
Gail always says that, he could always get the crop planted, and then the storms in June came, and he always lost his crops at least 3 to 4 times out of 5 years.
I was getting ready to plant for the year, and out of the cold blue, Andy called me up, just cold called. Didn't have any idea who he was, and he said some things I liked, and so we had a meeting and we restored this back to a wetland.
So we learned a lot from our early restoration practices, but we really quickly realized that, these were dynamic systems that evolved under grazing by buffalo, wildfires, drought, deluge, and the disturbance is really important for maintaining the desired wetland vegetation communities that provide the seeds that the ducks rely on.
And grazing is about the only option we have to raise revenue. Sure, we got a lot of help through Andy Bishop, Game and Parks, the Nebraska Environmental Trust. Anytime I ask for help, they're there to help. We've owned this property since 2002, and we did have a pair of whooping cranes here a year ago that were just here for one day. This year, on April 14th, saw the 4 large whooping cranes over across the road. I was all concerned the birds would leave right away, and they ended up sticking around for 11 days. And a lot of people got to see the birds. I mean, my wife and I, we got very attached to them. And I have a 10-page journal, which about a page a day for where they were located, what they did, where they went to feed, who was here to see them, and it was a fun time.
For a lot of time, wetlands have been thought of as wasteland or an obstacle to farm around. And now that we understand better the ecosystem benefits and services that wetlands can provide, it's important that people understand they're not a wasteland. They're a natural filter. They're an important recharge point. They provide habitat. They provide recreational opportunities. There's a lot of different things that wetlands provide that, make the landscape more enjoyable. So I think there's a great opportunity for us to talk about, not just the habitat and the wildlife, but also the benefits that go beyond wetlands that really influence every Nebraska resident.
You